Edmund Hartwell returned to his mansion on a cold November evening, rain drumming against imported window panes. 3 weeks inspecting copper mines in the Montana Territory had left him bone-tired and eager to see his children. The door swung open before he reached it. Catherine and Thomas stood in the marble entry hall like soldiers awaiting inspection. 10 years old, dressed in their finest clothes, backs straight as fence posts, their hands clasped before them, knuckles white. "Good evening, sir," they said in perfect unison. Not father, not papa. Sir. Edmund froze, carpet bag still in hand. The words hit him like a pickaxe to the chest. He searched their faces for warmth, recognition, anything beyond this terrible politeness. Catherine's eyes remained fixed on the floor. Thomas's jaw was set too firm for a child. Good evening, Edmund managed. His voice sounded hollow in the high-ceilinged hall. Neither child moved to embrace him. Neither smiled. Charlotte Morgan appeared in the parlor doorway, her gray dress simple against the mansion's opulence. The governess he'd hired 6 months ago watched with quiet eyes that seemed to see too much. She gave a small nod, then withdrew. Your journey was satisfactory, sir? Catherine asked. The question was rehearsed. Perfected. Yes. Quite satisfactory. We trust the mines are profitable. Sir, Thomas added. Edmund felt something crack inside him. They spoke like miniature businessmen addressing a client. He'd built this house with mining money, 3 stories of brick and crystal chandeliers. The finest home in Copper Creek. Every advantage money could buy lived within these walls. But his children called him Sir. You may return to your studies, he said quietly. They curtsied and bowed, then walked up the stairs with measured steps. No running. No childish exuberance. Just careful. Controlled movement until they disappeared around the landing. Edmund stood alone in the entry hall. Rain continued its drumbeat. The house was warm, but felt cold as a mine shaft in January. He retreated to his study and poured whiskey he didn't want. For won't you stall I? The fire crackled, throwing shadows across leather-bound books he never read. Through the ceiling came faint sounds of Charlotte's voice reading a bedtime story. The children's laughter floated down like something from another world. Edmund approached the stairs an hour later. Lamplight glowed beneath the children's door. He raised his hand to knock, to join them, to somehow bridge the distance. His hand lowered. 10 feet of hallway stretched between them. It might as well have been 10 miles. He returned to his study and stared into the fire until it burned to embers. Morning light filtered weak through library windows when Edmund summoned Charlotte for coffee. She entered quietly, taking the chair across from his desk, with an ease that spoke of hard-won dignity. A widow at 32. She'd told him during the interview. No children of her own. She'd been raising his instead. Miss Morgan, I need to understand something. Edmund set down his cup. Why do my children treat me like a stranger? Charlotte's expression held no judgment, only a gentle sadness. Do you want honesty, Mr. Hartwell? I'm paying for it. You're paying for their education. Honesty is free. She folded her hands. Your children don't know informal love, only formal respect. The words landed soft but cut deep. I provide everything they need, Edmund said. Tutors, music lessons, the finest clothes, everything except yourself. The library fell silent. Rain had stopped overnight, leaving the world scrubbed and gray. Edmund felt exposed under Charlotte's steady gaze. My father raised me the same way. he said. It didn't harm me. Didn't it? Charlotte's voice remained kind. You're a wealthy man who sits alone every evening. You return from travels to children who greet you like a bank manager. Does that feel like success? Mr. Hartwell. Edmund's jaw tightened. No one spoke to him this way. Miners jumped at his word. Business partners courted his favor. But this widow in a gray dress saw through him like water through a sluice. What do you suggest? We, children, need time. Not demands. Patience. Not commands. Charlotte leaned forward slightly. They need to know you want them. Not just to provide for them. There's a difference. Edmund thought of the sounds through his ceiling last night. Laughter he'd never heard from them. Trust he'd never earned. I can change that, he said with the certainty that had built his fortune. I'll win their hearts. Show them I care. Something flickered in Charlotte's eyes. Doubt. Perhaps. Or pity. I hope you succeed. Mr. Hartwell, they deserve a father, not just a benefactor. I shall. She rose and moved toward the door. Miss Morgan. She paused. Sex. How do I begin? Charlotte's expression softened. Stop thinking of it as a problem to solve. They're not a vein of copper to be mined. They're children who need to be known. After she left. Edmund sat staring at his cold coffee. The distinction she'd drawn felt like a blade between his ribs. Benefactor. Not father. Provider. Not parent. He'd spent 10 years building an empire. Perhaps it was time to build a family. But Charlotte's doubt lingered in the air like smoke. She'd seen something in him he couldn't yet see in himself. The portrait hung above the study mantel where it had hung for 10 years. Margaret Hartwell. Forever young. Forever smiling. Her face held the beauty of a woman who'd never known the twins now sleeping upstairs. Edmund stood before it with a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. She'd died giving them life. The doctor had offered a choice in those final moments: save the mother or save the babies. Edmund had hesitated too long. Margaret had made the choice herself, whispering instructions with her last strength. He'd never forgiven the twins for taking her, never forgiven himself for failing to save her. So he'd buried his grief in copper and silver, in expanding the mines until his name meant something in Montana territory. He'd left the infants to a wet nurse, then a nanny, then a succession of governesses who came and went like seasons. He provided everything money could buy, everything except the one thing they needed. Movement outside caught his eye. Through the window, he saw Charlotte in the garden gazebo, wrapped in a shawl against November cold. Catherine and Thomas sat pressed against her sides while she read from a book. Their faces were animated, alive in a way Edmund had never seen. Thomas pointed at something on the page. Charlotte laughed and ruffled his hair. Catherine leaned closer, asking a question Edmund couldn't hear. The governess answered with exaggerated gestures that made both children giggle. They called her Miss Charlotte. Not ma'am, not madam. Miss Charlotte. With warmth that made the name a gift. Something broke in Edmund's chest, something that had been frozen since Margaret took her last breath. He saw what he'd failed to build. The twins didn't lack a mother, they had Charlotte. What they lacked was him. A father who was present, not just a man who paid bills and appeared occasionally like a distant uncle. The realization hurt worse than Margaret's death. That had been fate's cruelty. This was his own. Edmund set down his glass and left the study. He found Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper. In the kitchen, the formal parlor, he said. Open it for family use. No more keeping it pristine for guests who never come. Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose. Sir, make it comfortable, warm. Somewhere children would want to be. He returned to the window. Charlotte was teaching the twins a song now, their voices rising together. They looked like a family, a complete circle that didn't include him, but circles could expand. They had to. Edmund Hartwell had conquered mountains and extracted fortunes from stone. Aloud and withdrew. Surely he could find a way into his own children's hearts. The thought felt less like confidence and more like prayer. The mechanical train was German-made, brass fittings gleaming, small enough to fit in a boy's hands but expensive as a month's wages. Edmund presented it with the pride of a man offering treasure. Thomas accepted it with a perfect bow. How generous. Sir, we are most grateful. The words were correct. The heart was absent. Catherine's porcelain doll came wrapped in silk. She curtsied and thanked him with identical politeness. Both gifts disappeared into their rooms. Edmund saw them later, untouched on shelves, while Thomas played with a wooden horse Charlotte had carved, and Catherine dressed a rag doll, the governess, Hemacon had sewn. Shall we read together this evening? Edmund suggested at dinner. I've brought books from Denver. That would be most agreeable. Sir. The twins chorused. They gathered in the newly opened parlor after supper. Edmund chose a chair. The children perched on the settee like birds ready for flight. He read from the Adventures of Tom Sawyer, trying to give the words life and warmth. Catherine and Thomas sat rigid. They answered when asked questions. They nodded politely, but their bodies remained tense. Their responses, monosyllabic. After 30 minutes, that felt like hours. Edmund set the book aside. Perhaps we'll continue tomorrow. As you wish, sir. They left with the same measured steps they'd used to enter. No requests for more story. No protests at bedtime. Just obedient departure. Through the window, Edmund saw Charlotte helping them build a snow fort in the yard. The first snow had fallen that afternoon, transforming the grounds into white silence. The children's shrieks of joy pierced the cold air like bells. Charlotte showed Thomas how to pack snow properly. She ducked Catherine's snowball and laughed when it caught her shoulder. Yasimani. The three of them moved together with easy affection, building walls and planning attacks on imaginary enemies. Edmund wasn't invited. He watched from behind glass, separated by more than windows. The town ladies whispered about him. Edmund Hartwell, who could manage 1,000 miners but couldn't reach. 2 small hearts. The whispers stung because they were true. That night he lay awake listening to the house settle. Somewhere above him, his children slept in rooms filled with expensive things and empty of love. Charlotte's quarters were down the hall from theirs. He imagined the governess checking on them before bed, straightening blankets, perhaps kissing foreheads the way mothers did, the way he never had. Snow continued falling. The mansion grew colder despite fires burning in every room. Edmund pulled his quilt higher and wondered if some distances were too great to cross. Outside, the snow fort stood half-finished in the yard. Tomorrow the children would complete it with Charlotte. Shakigana-san-nan. Tomorrow, Edmund would return to his mines and his ledgers, to the work he understood. The mechanical train gathered dust. Edmund stopped trying to command affection and started watching. The change came gradually, born of desperation and Charlotte's gentle wisdom. He observed from the hallway as Charlotte taught Catherine embroidery, not with rigid instruction, but with stories woven between stitches. This knot reminds me of a sailor I once knew, she'd say. And Catherine would lean closer, eager for the tale. Her needle moved with Charlotte's, learning through shared experience rather than correction. When Thomas returned from school with red eyes and a torn jacket, Edmund heard the boy confide in Charlotte over cookies in the kitchen. Menorhai saw aki make itanen. Billy Henderson said I'm peculiar because I read books. Thomas whispered, Charlotte didn't dismiss the hurt or offer empty comfort. She sat beside him, one hand on his shoulder. But Billy Henderson probably doesn't know many words longer than his name. People fear what they don't understand. Thomas, your mind is a gift, not a peculiarity. The boy's shoulders relaxed. He ate another cookie. He smiled. Edmund, hidden in the doorway, realized Charlotte gave them something he'd never learned to offer. Presence without performance. Listening without judgment. She made herself small enough to enter their world instead of demanding they rise to hers. The evening coffee ritual began without formal arrangement. After the children slept, Charlotte would find Edmund in the library. They'd talk while firelight played across the walls. How did you learn this? Edmund asked one night. To be so natural with them. I don't do anything special. Charlotte cradled her cup in both hands. I just love them. But you're not their mother. No. Something sad flickered across her face. My husband and I hoped for children. The Lord had different plans. These two aren't mine by blood, but they're mine to care for. That's enough. Edmund studied her in the lamplight. Not beautiful in the way Margaret had been beautiful, but handsome in a way that spoke of strength and kindness layered by life's hardships. Teach me, he said. How you do it? Charlotte set down her cup. Edmund. The use of his Christian name startled them both. She'd never used it before. You can't learn love like mining techniques. It's not a skill to master. It's a choice to be vulnerable. I don't know how. I know. Her voice held no criticism. Your father didn't teach you. Margaret died before she could. You've been alone a long time. The words settled over Edmund like snow. True and cold and undeniable. What if they never see me as more than the man who pays the bills? The confession cost him something to speak. Then you keep trying anyway. Not because success is guaranteed. Because they're worth the effort. Later that night, Edmund heard small voices through the wall between the children's rooms. Do you think Miss Charlotte will stay forever? Catherine whispered. I hope so. Thomas replied, She makes everything better. What if Papa sends her away? What if he gets cross with her like he did Miss Peters? Miss Charlotte is different. She's not afraid of him. Edmund stood in the dark hallway, hand pressed against the wall. His children feared losing the one person who made them feel safe, the one person who wasn't him. What happened when Charlotte left governesses never stayed. They married or moved on or found better positions. And when she did, these children would lose another mother. Unless Edmund learned what Charlotte was trying to teach him, unless he became the father they needed. Not just the benefactor who provided. The thought terrified him more than any business risk he'd ever taken. Edmund tried joining the evening ritual uninvited. Or spordikin in youths. It seemed a reasonable next step. Charlotte had suggested presence, so he would be present. He appeared at the children's door with Treasure Island under his arm. A day ain't Cosby's tea. Catherine and Thomas looked up from where they sat on either side of Charlotte, confusion clear on their faces. I thought I might read tonight. Edmund said. Charlotte's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. Mr. Hartwell. She moved to a chair in the corner. Edmund took her place on the bed between the children. They shifted away, creating distance. The small movement spoke volumes. He opened the book and began reading. His voice sounded too loud in the quiet room. Catherine stared at her hands. Thomas picked at a loose thread on the quilt. Neither looked at the pages. Thomas. Are you listening? Edmund asked. Yes, sir. What just happened in the story? Pirates. Sir, it was a guess. Edmund had been reading about a map. He continued for 15 painful minutes. The children sat frozen like rabbits sensing a fox. Charlotte watched from her chair, her face carefully neutral. When Edmund reached the end of a chapter, silence fell heavy as January snow. Shall I continue? He asked. If it pleases you, sir. Catherine whispered. Nothing pleased him less. But pride kept him reading. Another chapter, another stretch of excruciating politeness and barely concealed discomfort. Finally, he closed the book. Perhaps that's enough for tonight. As you wish. Sir, thank you for reading to us. Sir. The gratitude was automatic, empty. Edmund left the room and closed the door behind him. He stood in the hallway, chest tight. Through the wood came Catherine's voice, suddenly alive. Miss Charlotte, what happened next in the story you were telling? The one about the merchant ship. Charlotte's low. Response. Then laughter, both children, bright and genuine. They were asking questions, making jokes, being themselves, the selves they hid when he was present. Edmund returned to his study and found himself drafting a letter to his sister in Boston. Perhaps Clara could take the twins for a while. She had 3 children of their own. A warm household, a husband who smiled. Perhaps Catherine and Thomas needed what he couldn't provide. Perhaps he should stop trying. The next day brought an early blizzard that trapped them inside. Snow piled against windows. Wind howled through eaves. For 3 days they lived confined together in the mansion's comfortable prison. Edmund tried staying in his study, giving them space. But he heard their voices everywhere, playing games with Charlotte in the parlor, learning songs in the music room, helping Mrs. Chen bake bread in the kitchen. Life happened in rooms where he wasn't. He was a ghost in his own home, present but unseen, providing but not participating. On the 3rd night, Edmund stood at his window watching snow fall. The unsent letter to Clara sat on his desk. Yanaki. One signature and he could free these children from the burden of his inadequacy. One signature, and he could stop failing. The mechanical train sat on Thomas's shelf, untouched. The porcelain doll remained in its silk wrapping. All the money in Montana couldn't buy what Charlotte gave freely. Maybe some men weren't meant to be fathers. Maybe he'd inherited more from his own cold father than he wanted to admit. The blizzard blew itself out. The house remained frozen. Charlotte found him at dawn, the letter visible on his desk. She picked it up without asking permission and read it while Edmund stood silent. Running won't heal this. Edmund. She set the letter down. I'm not running. I'm accepting reality. They're better off with Clara. Are they, or are you just scared? The word stung. Edmund Hartwell wasn't scared. He'd faced down striking miners, negotiated with railroad barons, survived cave-ins and market crashes. I'm being practical, he said. You're being a coward. Edmund's head snapped up. Charlotte met his gaze without flinching. Those children upstairs don't need your money or your mansion. They need you. Flawed. Uncertain. Trying and failing you. That's what fathers are. Edmund. Not perfect providers. Just men who show up and keep showing up even when it's hard. I don't know how to show up the right way. Then learn. Charlotte moved closer. Stop trying to earn their love like a business transaction. Love isn't earned. It's given freely and received humbly. You make it sound simple. It's terrifying. She agreed. Loving someone means risking rejection, means being vulnerable, means accepting you might fail. But the alternative is this: standing in your study writing letters to send your children away because you're too afraid to keep trying. Edmund sank into his chair. What if I'm too broken? What if my father damaged something in me that can't be fixed? Charlotte knelt beside his chair, bringing her eyes level with his. Then you're broken. Join the rest of us. My husband died and left me childless. You lost Margaret and retreated from grief. We're all carrying wounds. Edmund, the question isn't whether you're broken. It's whether you're willing to heal. Will you teach me the way you're teaching them? I can't teach you to love your children. That's already there. I see it every time you watch them through windows. Every time your voice catches when you say their names. What I can teach you is patience, presence, how to stop performing fatherhood and start being a father. Jag fan inte här. What's the difference? Performance is about you, how you look. Whether you're doing it right, being is about them, what they need, who they are, how they feel. She stood and moved to the window. You've been performing. Edmund, bringing gifts, reading books, checking boxes, but you haven't been listening, haven't been still enough to let them come to you. They won't come to me. Not yet, because they don't trust you. Trust takes time. How much time? However long it takes. Marla turned from the window. Here's my condition. You surrender the need to control the outcome. Children aren't minds to manage. They're people to be known. You might do everything right and still not win their hearts immediately. Can you accept that? Edmund looked at the letter on his desk. One signature away from escape, or one step away from transformation. Yes. He said, teach me. The blizzard had broken overnight. Weak winter sun pierced clouds, turning snow to diamonds. Charlotte helped Edmund plan Christmas. Not expensive gifts, but simple pleasures. Time together, presents instead of presents. Start small, she advised. Ask what they want to do, not what you want to give them. Listen more than you speak. And Edmund. Yes. Stop calling yourself sir in your head. You're their father. Act like it. That afternoon, Edmund found Thomas building a snow fort in the yard. Instead of watching from the window, he put on his coat and went outside. May I help? He asked. Thomas looked uncertain. If you wish. Sir. Show me how you pack the snow. I've forgotten. It was a lie. Edmund had built plenty of snow forts as a boy. But it gave Thomas a chance to teach, to be the expert. The boy demonstrated hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. Edmund followed his instructions, praising his technique. They worked side by side for 20 minutes, not talking much, just building together. When they finished, Thomas looked at the fort with pride. It's good, isn't it? Sir, it's excellent. You're a fine architect. Thomas almost smiled. It wasn't much, but it was something. A first crack in ice that had been frozen for 10 years. Edmund went to bed that night exhausted, but less hopeless. Charlotte's wisdom echoed in his mind. Keep showing up. That's all fatherhood is. He could do that. He could show up. Christmas morning arrived soft with fresh snow. Edmund woke early and found Charlotte already in the kitchen helping Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast. Minsenska's tonight. The house smelled of cinnamon and pine. They're still sleeping, Charlotte said, but not for long. And she was right. Within minutes, small footsteps thundered overhead. Catherine and Thomas appeared on the stairs in their nightclothes, faces bright with anticipation. Happy Christmas, Edmund said. Happy Christmas, sir. They replied in unison. But their eyes were on the parlor where a pine tree stood decorated with paper chains and candles. Shucked 'em. Edmund had followed Charlotte's advice. Instead of expensive toys, he'd chosen simple gifts. A set of watercolors for Catherine, who loved to paint. A leather journal for Thomas, who was always scribbling stories. And for both of them, a promise. Today is ours, Edmund said. No tutors, no lessons, just family time. What would you like to do? The twins looked at Charlotte for permission. She nodded encouragingly. Could we decorate cookies? Catherine asked tentatively. All afternoon if you want. Thomas spoke up. And could we sing carols, all of us together? I'd like that very much. The day unfolded gentle and sweet. They decorated cookies and made a mess of the kitchen. They sang carols with Charlotte playing piano. Edmund's voice was rough, but he sang anyway, watching his children's faces glow in candlelight. Evening came soft. They gathered in the parlor. Tree candles lit, fire crackling. Charlotte suggested reading the Christmas story. She handed Edmund the Bible. He read about Mary and Joseph, about shepherds and angels. Catherine and Thomas listened, leaning against the arms of Edmund's chair, not touching him yet, but closer than they'd been. When he finished, Charlotte prompted them to read from A Christmas Carol. Catherine volunteered. She read beautifully, caught up in Scrooge's transformation, halfway through the scene where Scrooge wakes on Christmas morning. She turned to Edmund. Papa, do you think Scrooge really changed? The word hung in the air like a bell's echo. Catherine's eyes went wide. She'd realized her mistake. The slip of tongue. Her face drained of color. I apologize, sir, I meant, Papa is just fine. Catherine. Edmund's voice came thick with emotion. Better than fine. She searched his face, looking for anger or disappointment. Instead, she found tears on his cheeks. Saw truth in his eyes that maybe, finally, she could trust. She didn't correct herself. Thomas watched his sister carefully. Then he slid from his chair and stood beside Edmund's knee. Should I keep reading? Papa. Edmund couldn't speak. He nodded, throat too tight for words. Thomas took the book from Catherine and continued the story. Charlotte sat with her hands folded, eyes bright with unshed tears of her own. That night, after the children were tucked in, Edmund found Charlotte in the library. Thank you, he said. They did it themselves. You gave them room to choose. You gave me room to change. Edmund moved closer. Charlotte, I need to ask you something. She waited. Lamplight soft on her face. Will you stay not as governess, as family? The children love you. He paused. Finding courage, I need you too. You've already been their mother in every way that matters. Let me make it official. Edmund Hartwell, are you proposing, though badly, I expect, but yes. Or can chi, ita say ah. Charlotte smiled, bright as Christmas morning. Then yes, I'll stay. I'll marry you. I'll be their mother and your wife. And we'll be a family. imperfect and learning as we go. But family. Edmund kissed her there in the library. The fire crackling. Snow falling outside. 2 people who'd been alone finding home in each other. Upstairs. Catherine whispered through the wall, "Thomas, did you hear Papa's voice when we said it he wasn't angry?" "No," Thomas whispered back. "He sounded happy." "Do you think we could keep saying it?" "I think he wants us to." They slept easier that night than they had in years. Winter gave way slowly, as all Montana winters did. But by March, the snow had started melting. Crocuses pushed through frozen ground. The world was waking. So was the Hartwell family. Edmund came home from the mines one afternoon to find Thomas building a snowman in the yard. The last snow of the season was perfect packing consistency. "Papa, help me lift the head," Thomas called. The word came natural now, easy as breathing. Edmund didn't freeze or marvel at it. He just crossed the yard and helped his son. "Why do you believe?" This fellow needs a proper hat," Edmund said, placing his own bowler on the snowman's head. "And a scarf," Thomas added. Running to fetch one, they worked together. Building and laughing, Catherine joined them, bringing stones for eyes and a carrot for the nose. She looped her arm through Edmund's without thinking, standing back to admire their creation. "He looks distinguished," she declared, "like a mining baron." Thomas agreed. "Or a father," Edmund said quietly. The twins looked at him and smiled. Real smiles, reaching their eyes. By April, Papa was the only name they used. The formal distance had melted like March snow, leaving something green and growing in its place. They told him about school troubles and childhood dreams. They asked his opinion, and sometimes ignored his advice. They fought with him and made up. They were real with him. Finally, blessedly real. Edmund asked Charlotte to marry him properly. With the children present, they stood in the garden gazebo where he'd once watched her read to them, feeling excluded from their circle. "Miss Charlotte," Catherine said solemnly, "you're already our mother in our hearts. This just makes it official. We want you to stay forever." Thomas added, "Then forever it is," Charlotte promised. They married in May when the garden was blooming. Lilacs and wild roses. Montana sky endless overhead. The ceremony was simple, held in the same gazebo. Catherine and Thomas stood beside them as witnesses. Family already formed before the vows made it legal. Edmund spoke his promises, looking at all 3 of them, the woman who'd taught him to love, and the children. He'd learned to know. The town came for the celebration after. People who'd whispered about Edmund Hartwell's cold household now saw something different. Saw him dancing with his daughter, laughing with his son. Saw Charlotte watching with joy and pride. "You did it," she said when they had a quiet moment. "We did it," Edmund corrected. "You showed me the way. I just walked beside you." Summer came full. The mansion transformed from museum to home. Doors stayed open. Children's laughter filled hallways. Catherine's paintings hung on walls. Thomas's stories littered tables. The formal parlor became the family parlor. Well used and well loved. Edmund still worked his mines, but he came home earlier now, ate dinner with his family, read bedtime stories that the children actually enjoyed, learned to listen more than he spoke, to be present more than he provided. One August evening, he returned from a business trip to Denver. The train had been late, arriving well past dark. He opened the front door to the same marble entry hall where Catherine and Thomas had greeted him with, "Good evening, sir," nearly a year ago. But everything was different now. Papa's home. And the shout came from upstairs. Thunder on the stairs. The twins came running, night clothes flying, hair wild from getting ready for bed. They crashed into him with hugs and laughter and questions about his trip. Did you bring us anything? Was the train very crowded? We missed you terribly. Edmund wrapped his arms around both of them, breathing in the smell of soap and childhood. Charlotte appeared in the parlor doorway, smiling. He met her eyes over the children's heads. She'd given him this, given them all this. A family that ran to greet each other instead of standing at formal attention. Love that was freely offered instead of carefully performed. And teacher Fralde, I brought you stories, Edmund said to the twins, and myself. Is that enough? It's everything, Catherine said. Thomas hugged him tighter. Later, after the children finally slept and Charlotte sat beside him on the settee, Edmund thought about the man he'd been, the mining baron who measured worth in copper and silver, who'd built a mansion, but not a home. What are you thinking? Charlotte asked. That I spent years giving them metal. You gave them gold. What do you mean? The currency of belonging. Edmund took her hand. I gave them copper and silver, all the things money could buy. You gave them something more valuable. You gave them the gold of being known, being loved, being home. Charlotte leaned against his shoulder. Upstairs, the children slept peacefully in rooms full of simple treasures and genuine warmth. Outside, late summer crickets sang. Inside, the mansion was finally, truly a home. Edmund Hartwell had conquered mountains and extracted fortunes from stone. But his greatest achievement was simpler and harder won. He'd learned to be a father, not perfect, not polished, just present, patient, and trying every day. And in the trying, he'd found what he'd been searching for since Margaret died. He'd found family. He'd found purpose. He'd found peace. The twins called him Papa now. Charlotte called him husband, and Edmund called himself blessed.